Well, this movement to me is there's no question it must be led by people of color because of historically how people have been left out of the process, historically how, see anytime you have oppression and you add color to any oppression, the oppression doubles. So we know historically that people of color must be in a leadership role. That doesn't mean that we don't have other people who are working side by side because racism affects everybody. But this is one of the few issues that white people have not taken over, who are always in the leadership role of everything else. But when it comes to the deal with the racism, we have a lot of experience that we should be in leadership role and not let anybody let the superiority aspect of white people take over, because they'll do it not even intentionally, it still will be in charge. And you also have to be vigilant to make sure that doesn't happen, because it sneaks upon you where people automatically stays in charge. So we've got to keep this one because the years of experience we've had with it, but it's no question, it's in our interest that we stay in charge. If other people get in charge, they'll find other ways to, we believe, to water it down, and you have to be conscious of it at all times.
There is some discussion in the women's movement, that when we're talking about racism, very often feminists will say, well, sexism isn't being addressed, or the people who are gay, lesbian, trans will say, well, those issues aren't being addressed, or if they're Jewish, they'll say anti-Semitic. And you take the stand that you must be clear about racism, because if you're not clear about racism, then it'll confuse. Could you speak to that?
Well, I just want to make it real clear. Intersectionality is a very big, important issue in this country. And at the People's Institute, we don't minimize no oppression. We would be foolish to do something like that. We know sexism, homophobia, classism, all these things are oppressive. We know of the struggles that men and women have been through, I don't care who they are. But we also know, as I said earlier, our experience that any time you add color to any oppression, the oppression doubles. We don't want to compare issues, who's most oppressed. But we know when you check the history that race has never been addressed in any way. When you check all the various movements, whether it's the populist movement, the women's movements, the civil rights movement, all those movements, every time since we didn't address race, that's the thing that divided the movement, because we had a movement but not addressing race, then the movement stopped. So we're saying whatever movement that we have, that we're part of now, if we want this movement to continue, racism must be addressed. But we're not here to compare the system. But when people call us to do an undoing racism workshop, we will bring in all the various oppressions. But what we found is that in many of these oppressions, when you start talking about racism, we find people very strategically will bring in other isms as a form of escapism, because they're uncomfortable about certain issues or issues that they're not in control of. So that's why we don't get in this high ideological discussion about what's the worst oppression. We're not here to compare them, but we are going to lift our understanding about racism, because that has always been on the back burner. But we also know it's been the one has divided every movement that I've been aware of in this country. So that's why we got to begin to deal with it, because we think understanding racism in all of those movements, because we've been working with many of these organizations, women's movements, again, lesbian movement, and we've seen racism play out in those movements as prevalent as anything else. And so we think you've got to deal with race to make any movement a humane type movement. Otherwise, it's going to give advantage to white people every time in our experience.